following podcast is for informational purposes only. The contents of this podcast do not constitute tax, legal, or investment advice. Take responsibility for your own decisions, consult with the proper professionals, and do your own research.
It may make sense to leverage the digital infrastructure rails that have been built around cryptocurrencies to do that, right? You might go out and send your robot to do these transactions and use those rails because you trust them, they're safer, they're hard to crack versus the old credit card and financial rails for doing that.
GRTiQ podcast.
We're like astronauts floating in the space of time.
Welcome to the GRTiQ podcast. Today, I'm speaking with John Belizaire, CEO of Soluna Holdings, a pioneering developer of green data centers designed for batchable computing, utilizing wasted renewable energy. Put more simply, Soluna is essentially using unused energy or wasted energy from renewable power sources like solar power to power data centers that serve industries like the emerging AI industry. During our conversation, John shares his remarkable background, recounting his early entry into the tech industry and sharing some fun anecdotes from his time working at Intel during the era of Andy Grove. We then talk about the evolution of AI, discussing how Soluna, not to be confused with Solana, addresses energy challenges associated with AI and blockchain. John also shares a lot of insights into business, entrepreneurship, management, and his vision for the future of Web3 and crypto. We started the discussion by talking about where John is from.
I grew up in Brooklyn. I was actually born in the Bahamas, came to the States when I was about 4 to 5 years old. Grew up in Brooklyn in the late 70s, 80s, when New York City was very different than it is now. I think New York is a bit more like a Disneyland now. Back then, they were putting out movies like Escape from New York. I mean, it was almost like a war zone, challenging, bankrupt city. And it's just amazing to see the transition that it's made over the last 30 plus years. I went to high school in Brooklyn, went to the New York City public school system, and then I went upstate for university. I went to Cornell, did my grad and undergrad in computer sciences.
When you think back to your childhood, like what types of things were you into? And was it an early indication in your life that you were going to go into tech?
Absolutely. I was a geek by all definition, definitely a nerd. I saved up allowance money and gift money to buy my first computer, which was a TRS-80, probably dating myself, Trash 80. Tandy Computing created that. It was a home PC. I used to hang out with friends that had Commodore PCs and so forth. It started actually in junior high school. I was fortunate enough to start at a junior high school in New York called Maggie L. Walker. It was a brand new school, new curriculum design that was focused more on, what today would be sort of STEM skills. So they had a computer lab there. I showed an incredible interest in the technology, and the teacher sort of took me under his wing and started giving me extra coding homework. And so I bought my first computer and started, doing these exercises and wrote this program that did text to speech. It was pretty funny. My aunt happened to be visiting from Haiti and came into my room and saw me working on this program. And I says, look, I wrote this thing that can, make the computer talk, And it says, hello, my name is so-and-so. And she says, wow, that's impressive. But if you want to impress me more, make it speak French. That, really set me off. I was a very inquisitive kid. I was the kind of kid that would take my toys and throw them on the ground, break them, and try to see how they actually worked inside. And I would, in summers, rather than hang out home watching TV, I would submit myself to these summer camps that have science fairs and things like that. And I would buy all sorts of transistor radios and put them together. So I was very inquisitive, interested in how the world works and trying to be inventive around things. I wasn't really big into sports, like to read a lot and just learn things.
John, you're not the first entrepreneur I've featured on this podcast. In fact, I have a long list of people I've had the opportunity to speak with. And that theme of being a young person and tearing something apart and then putting it back together just to see how it works has come up time and time again. When it comes up, I love to ask the follow-up of what is it do you think that sort of that brain pairs well with entrepreneurship and technology? Have you ever thought about that?
Entrepreneurship is about creating something from nothing. You're taking an idea and then you're bringing it into the world, and then you're essentially creating this sort of breathing, humming entity, right? That hopefully will survive you over a long period of time. And tinkering is what I describe this concept of like taking things, breaking them apart and everything, I guess is really about gaining insight about how did they do that? I also would read a lot about companies, and I was following IBM when I was younger. Like, how did they do that? How did they become this company that was in every business, and what were these machines that they were building? I guess it's a way to sort of find a blueprint to take ideas into reality. Entrepreneurship is really about that. I spend most of my time convincing the world that some new innovation, a picture of the world is coming or is here that they just don't realize yet or don't see it. And I have to be able to sort of explain it in a way to help them see that vision. The other aspect, I think, as I'm talking here, is the process of sort of tinkering helps you find the complexities with what seems like simplicity. I like to say that the most successful companies do really, really hard things, or they solve really hard problems, but they make them look really easy. So when you look at these toys that do these amazing things, I used to break apart like it's like the farmer toy that where you pull the thing and then it spins around, and then each animal, it says the name. I was like, how do they do that? It's so simple, but like, how can they do a different animal, a different voice? You know what I mean? And how does it know when our animal got to that particular location? So I had to throw that thing against the wall and see what types of interesting problems they had to solve to do that. And ultimately, when you start to take apart companies, that's what you realize. You've got to build a really strong culture. You've got to find ways to innovate in a consistent way. You have to build systems to help people communicate, solve problems. You have to build a brand. There's a lot going on that ultimately is experienced by the world as a very simple, elegant solution.
Well, John, as you mentioned there, you graduated from Cornell University and you got your career started at Intel as a network architect. And so I want to ask you this question about what it was like working at one of the most important early tech firms in the US, that of Intel.
Yeah. So Intel was an incredible experience. It actually was a formative experience for me. I have a long-standing relationship with the company. I was what is known as an Intel Scholar, which basically means that they find young students with high potential to have them sort of join their pipeline of future leaders. And then they go all the way back to university and get involved in their education and support. They give them internships. And so I would be going out to Intel every summer for about 5 straight years, something like that. And so I learned a lot about what big companies are like. How do you create a, legendary company, if you will? Andy Grove was the CEO of the time, probably is to this day one of the best leaders I've ever seen. I learned a lot from him about shaping technology, getting your team to be focused and doing it in a way that's forceful, but yet, not too forceful, and thinking about big technology waves and how they sort of shape the future. I was part of a software group that was formed at Intel to essentially drive the demand for chips. Andy Grove, who was one of the founders and chairman of Intel, he is the creator of Moore's Law. And I was there watching and living the experience of Moore's Law, where every 12 to 18 months, we had to build a new giant fabrication facility, drop $2 billion down plus, and one had to create as much demand for those chips as they started to come out of that manufacturing facility as possible. And so to do that, we had to think about ways to create software that would enhance and demonstrate the power of the chip and get that software out there and, go out and sort of teach and explain what that looks like. So I was part of this group that was focused on that. In fact, that was the beginning of what ultimately changed the trajectory of the PC. There was a famous keynote speech by Andy Grove at one of the big PC conferences. He said that the PC can be more than just a calculator. At the time, spreadsheets were like the biggest use for the PC. And he says it can be a communication device. And he puts up on the screen, this grandma and child talking to each other over the PC. And people were just like blown away. Like, what does that mean? And it's funny to to be saying that, right? Because now we talk to so many people. I'm on like 10,000 Zooms a day, and we just take it for granted that the PCs are much more than their communication and collaboration devices. And the key to that was through this concept of convergence. You took two ideas. One was a computing technology, and you combined it with telecommunications. At the time, telecom was going through deregulation. They had to find new ways to generate revenue because they weren't sort of protected by this monopolistic position. So competition became huge. So they had to innovate. And connecting to the PC was an exciting thing. And it set the stage for transforming the entire telecom infrastructure globally and allows us to do a host of different things, right? It set the stage for the internet and all of this. So effectively, the experience at Intel set the foundation for my entire entrepreneurial career. I learned about innovation from a fundamental level. I learned about management and leadership. I learned about sort of technology ecosystems, scaling a business, manufacturing. It was a very exciting time for me to be part of that company because they were sort of on top of the world. It saddens me actually to be talking about them because, they've lost their footing, right? And they missed mobile, they missed AI. They're sort of catching up. And that is a quintessential sort of innovator's dilemma, right? They fell because their business became so successful. They couldn't kill their own business to embrace new innovation. Given the leadership that's back there, they'll certainly come back and make progress. But it's an exciting time again. Hardware is sexy again. So it's interesting you asked that question, right? When I joined Intel, hardware was really sexy. And then software became king. And now hardware is coming back, It's pretty exciting.
I've never had the opportunity to speak with anybody who knew or worked alongside someone like Andy Grove, and he's somebody I deeply respect. Do you have any stories or anecdotes or anything you can kind of share with us about what Andy was like?
Yeah, he was an amazing leader. There's some great books about his life that I've read many times, and he had just an incredible background, just an incredibly resilient individual. But he ran the company with an iron fist. He had this list. If you came in to the sites after 8 a.m., Intel had this thing, you got to get in the office by 8 a.m. And if you weren't there, they had to write your name down. And then he would get that list every day and talk to people and say, like, what's going on? Like, do you know what we need to do? What we're trying to do here? We're under fire because Japan was really starting to eat people's lunch. I was actually there. He wrote a book called Only the Paranoid Survive, which talks about this sort of existential decision that they had to make about whether they would stay in the memory business or go into the microprocessor business, right? It was the first time that they made a decision to kill their own business, get out of something and then go do something else, and ultimately bet on that thing. And it takes you through that entire process of making that decision. I was there, like the Hamilton show. I was in the room when it happened. I would go to sort of these labs where these guys were, playing with neural networks and like microprocessors and saying, I think this is what we should be focusing on, not this memory stuff. This is the future, They were making their case to Andy about this. I finally remember the town halls that he would do. So he would present sort of like what he sees in the future of the PC industry. What are some of the challenges ahead? And people can ask him questions, any question. The question that invariably comes like, why is our stock down? He's like, when you find out, you tell me. I can't control our stock. All I can do is tell you what to do, do the right things. And then people will eventually figure it out. So I remember that because, everybody asked me that. I'm like, when you find out, so you tell me. I would say the same thing. Then the other story was Andy Grove and Gordon Moore would actually come to Jones Farm, where I was based in Oregon, about once a quarter, and they would sit down and do a full technology review, every single project that was being funded by the company, because this was a big R&D location, both on the chip side and the software side. And they wanted to know in detail, what was the progress? What were the challenges? What was going on? And people would be so nervous when those visits would happen. People would be on their toes because invariably projects would be killed. They were not afraid to say, look, this isn't working. We have to get out of it. Like, just stop doing it. There's no point in continuing to divert resources to something that's not working. And the things that are working, they would get more resources. I just really feel fortunate to have started my career at such a legendary company, one of the best managed companies I've ever worked for. And I've tried to take those learnings and insights into every entrepreneurial experience that I've had for the ensuing 25 years since I've been there.
The GRTiQ podcast is made possible by a generous grant from the Graph Foundation. The Graph Grants program provides support for protocol infrastructure, tooling, dApps, subgraphs, and community building efforts. Learn more at thegraph.foundation. That's thegraph.foundation.
Hi, this is GRTiQ, and thank you for listening. Listeners who enjoy this content can help support the GRTiQ podcast by leaving a review or a 5-star rating wherever they download podcasts, by sharing episodes on social media, or by simply telling a friend or colleague about something they heard or learned from one of our guests. It's support from listeners like you that make it possible for us to keep shining a light on the people and stories behind Web3 and the graph. Well, as you mentioned there, you've been an entrepreneur ever since. I have a list of all the different firms and all the different things you've been involved with, and there's no question you're a serial entrepreneur. I do want to ask this question of why, when you're working at Intel and you're having this positive experience, why does someone like yourself say, actually, I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to go do my own thing. What's the moment that you sort of realize that? And is there a lot of risk and courage behind a decision like that?
So about 10 years ago, I had lunch with an old friend who was my suite mate at Cornell. And he reminded me of a question he asked me. He says, what do you want to do when you grow up? And I said, I want to be a CEO. He says, how did you know at that time that's what you want to do? I've always wanted to do that. It started, I think, all the way back, again, when I was talking about sort of studying IBM in high school. I just was really enamored by the concept of building an enterprise and creating, again, something from nothing. So I've always had that passion. So in grad school, two of the co-founders of my first company and I wrote a business plan. We actually were these 3 engineers. We wanted to create a software company, really sort of inspired by one of our professors who had done that, built the company, sold it, and he was our advisor. And we wanted to take this business school class. And we went to the business school and said, it's an entrepreneurship class. And they said, we don't allow engineers in there. And we're like, why not? We can join the class. So we went and complained to our advisor, to the dean. And so people made some calls and they allowed us into the class. Dr. David Ben Daniels was the professor at the time. May he rest in peace. We joined this class and, people are talking about concepts and it was a case model and everything. And we're like, oh my God, what have we done? We don't know anything about what these guys are saying. And, some of these cases you had to sort of just say like, what would you do if you were there? To make a long story short, David became fond of us because we were using our gut. One thing he was trying to teach the class was decisions aren't always about, spreadsheets, A and B and X, Y, Z. Sometimes you just gotta go with your gut feel because no one really knows what the best answer is. You know the outcome now because you're looking, backward. So we wrote the business plan and then he read the business plan and he says, this is the first venture backable business plan that anybody's ever written. Most people write like, lemonade stands or whatever in the class just to get it done. We started working on doing it. And then we realized, well, wait a second, we don't have any experience. We have to go work. There's a lot we have to learn. And the professor was really upset. He's like, wait a second, what? You have to start this company. What is wrong with you people? They're like, but prof, we don't know anything about starting a business. And he says, well, if you don't start the business, I'm going to fail you, And he says, and we said, but if you fail us, then we can't start the business. He's like, God damn it. So we all decided, we're going to go and learn about entrepreneurship. So my two co-founders went to Boston and joined a startup. I went to Intel and was basically in a startup group because they were expanding into the networking business, trying to diversify the business out of PCs. And every Saturday we met to discuss what we were seeing in the industry and what ideas and companies we can form. And that ultimately led us to say, okay, we would like to leave where we're working right now and go take the plunge and start a company. I moved to Boston and slept on the floor of one of my co-founders' homes after he just got married. I don't recommend that for anybody, but it happened. I guess the answer to your question is it's always been inside of me, this drive to entrepreneurship, this attraction to it. And even when I was at Intel, look, I was progressing in my career. I just reconnected with my first manager at Intel, Raj Shivadkar, very successful leader, now the CTO of Juniper Networks. He told me at lunch, he says, you were this star, we always knew you would be good. And then the other day I was throwing some boxes out and I found like one of these awards I got from Intel. So clearly I had a great career there, but I just didn't feel satiated. I knew that ultimately I had to follow this dream. Like, let's go try it out. If it doesn't work out, I'll just come back to Intel. That's what actually one of my, mentors there told me, he had this whole, actually, this is a good story. I was losing sleep. I was like, okay, should I really go do the startup thing? My career is really starting to take shape here. So there's this guy, Art Spurrell, who was one of like the advisors of the Intel scholars. They gave you sort of these key leaders that you can talk to. And so I had lunch with him in the Intel cafeteria and I explained my dilemma. I got this career here, my friends and I, we sort of decided we want to go do this startup, but I'm really worried about it. I'm like losing sleep. And he puts a glass of water in front of me, has a little ice in it. And he says, put your finger in there. And I said, okay. He would do stuff like that. Like he would make people like do push-ups during their interviews. Anyway, so he makes me put my finger in the glass and I say, okay. He says, what do you see? The water's all around my finger. What? Pull your finger out. And I says, okay. So I pull my finger out of the glass and he said, what do you see now? Nothing. Just like, so the gap is gone, right? So we're going to be okay if you leave and go do the startup, and if you come back, we'll just plug you back in. Don't worry about it. Maybe I just needed permission to just go do it, And so that was a pivotal meeting that ultimately drove me to one or more successes over the course of my life. And so, like I said, that was a very formative experience for me, the whole Intel experience.
Well, as I said, there's been a bunch of these ventures, and I'll put a link in the show notes for any listener that wants to go through and take stock of all the different opportunities and businesses that you've been involved with. But we're speaking today primarily, John, because of what you're working on presently, which is Soluna. And I'd like to just start with this question about how did you first kind of get involved? What are the early seeds of the idea of getting started on Soluna?
The company that I ran before Soluna was in the insurance business. We were building it's called like a Bloomberg terminal for insurance underwriters. Can insurance underwriters use data and analytics and digital technology to improve their decisions for very complex risks? I ran that company for 10 years. We became very well known in the space. And then I took a break. It was a challenging company to build. Building a business in the insurance space is hard because they're in the business of risk mitigation, not risk taking, risk management, not risk taking, I like to say. And so bringing innovation to them is risk, and so it takes a long time to make decisions, that sort of thing. So to build the company at that level takes a lot of work, but I grew a lot as a leader, learned a lot. And I finally felt after that company that I didn't have to be the brainchild or, it didn't have to be my idea. I feel like now I was confident in my ability to be a CEO and I can go run other companies, that have existing products or teams that sort of need help with that growth and transition. So I started visiting with venture capital companies in the New York area and, found some interesting ideas, but nothing that I was sort of super passionate about. And right before I was about to decide on one of them, I got a call from a longtime friend of mine who is the head of a family office. He was on several of my boards, has been an investor with my companies in the past. And he said, "Hey, John, have you decided on anything yet?" I says, "No, I'm still sort of looking." And he said, "Good. Why don't you swing by my office? I got something you should look at." And I said, "Well, what's it about? Because your company, you don't run software companies. Like you run like these manufacturing company. I don't have anything to do with that." He says, just come by. The quick thing is that it has something to do with renewable energy and blockchain." And I said, "I don't know anything about renewable energy. Blockchain I've heard of. Okay, I'll swing by." My wife and I were about to go on some big trip. So I swing by his office, totally expecting to just hear this thing and say, "No, I'm not going to do that." And he started talking about this concept of having stranded energy in this project that they owned in Northern Africa, in Morocco, and blockchain computing was this, energy intensive capability. And they have this thesis that you could combine those two things and solve this problem, of how do you monetize wasted energy. What intrigued me about it, I said it earlier, right? It's like, what are these things? Why is this a problem? A hard problem that no one's ever solved before? Let me dig in. What is this blockchain thing? And so I literally downloaded the Satoshi white paper on my way to the beach, and I couldn't put it down. Like I was reading it on the plane. I'm like, oh my God, these are some of the most advanced like distributed computing and computer science problems. It seems to have been solved here. Holy smokes. And I started reading about power and energy markets, kind of in a first, principles way, like what is energy? And energy is not just owned by the utility company and they just build it out. It's like, no, it's a very huge, complex industry with multiple facets and, capital. And not to mention energy in Northern Africa. And I started looking at energy markets in the African continents, and it just became very intriguing to me. The reason he reached out to me, by the way, is because the company that owned the project was an energy company. Combining it with data centers and computing changed the nature of the company. It was no longer an infrastructure or development company. It was a technology company, and they needed someone to have that mindset, right? That insight. And so I decided to give it a swing. And plus, it wasn't insurance. Everybody, when I was doing those walkarounds, everybody's like, "Oh, so you've done this whole insurance thing. This is fantastic." Because there was capital rushing into the insurance industry, which I wish they had done 10 years ago. And I was like, "No, I don't want to do insurance. I already did that. I figured that out. That I solved the hard problem there. I want a new problem, And so this was one that was intriguing to me, and everything happens for a good reason in life. So that's how I got into it. When people ask me this question, I answer by saying, "Well, I was walking down the streets of New York. This black van showed up. A bunch of guys jumped out and grabbed me, threw me in the back and says, 'You're going into the energy business now,' because I just would never have imagined myself a software guy getting into the energy business. But because of what's happening with climate change, so many people with varied experiences and really smart guys have come into the space to try to help. It's really amazing and exciting, actually."
So let's reset the table just a little bit here for anybody who doesn't have kind of a clear understanding of what Soluna is. So if that's the way you got involved in it and it piqued your interest, talk to us about what it is and the types of problems it's working on.
Absolutely. So Soluna is on a mission to make renewable energy a global superpower. And we want to use computing as a catalyst. For the past couple of decades, renewable energy went from sort of like this small propeller heads kind of conferences talking about like how we can, build green electrons to a massive global industry. In fact, renewable energy sources are the fastest growing and cheapest source of energy in the world. And for us to hit our climate change goals, we need more of that form of energy that's more sustainable, use the power of nature to power the planet. And so there's a lot of capital that's come into it. That capital has accelerated since 2020. So there's lots of power plants being built. But there's a little secret about the industry. Most people don't know this, but about 30 to 40% of the power that these power plants produce never makes it to the grid. It gets wasted. It can't be monetized. And there are very few solutions to that problem, and if more of it gets wasted, it's harder to build power plants because of the economic challenges with that. One way is to, store the energy. Well, batteries just aren't scalable enough or big enough to support that. The other is to move the energy, right? Put it on a transmission line and move it across the country to where the power is needed. When the wind is blowing at night and everybody's asleep in Oklahoma, maybe you want to send it to Atlanta, and power some of the parties happening there. Well, those are hard to build. They take years, sometimes decades, and sometimes they never get built. And so how do you take power that basically is stranded and get it to load? Well, it turns out the way to solve the problem is to invert the problem. And that's one of my favorite tools. I know we're going to talk a lot about entrepreneurship, but mental models is a really key thing for me. Inversion is a fantastic mental model. If you have a really hard problem to solve, right? Invert the problem. If you want to realize how to make more money, invert the problem. How do you keep from losing a lot of money? How do you do that? You want to figure out how to get that 30 to 40%, wasted energy closer to load. Invert the problem. How do you get load closer to that stranded energy? And so you have to think differently about what load you can move to that location. Bringing load to generation is the insight that we had. And the perfect load is something that is fluid. It can be done anywhere in the world, is energy intensive. Well, guess what? That's computing. It turns out that Bitcoin computing and blockchain is very compute intensive and energy intensive on purpose because it provides a elegant method for securing the cryptocurrency networks that are powered by proof of work mining. It also turns out that AI is also compute intensive. There's billions, if not in a very short period of time, trillions of tokens that need to be processed and processed over a long period of time. The computing that's needed is these very powerful GPUs that plug in and keep cranking, right, to build out these models. They use a lot of energy. But guess what? You can do those types of computing anywhere. You can't do Netflix computing. Netflix has to kind of be close to you. It's streaming. You can't lose power suddenly. But these other forms of compute are batchable in nature. And so what Soluna does is basically goes to these wind farms. We go all around the country. We assess how much wasted energy they have. And we build data centers that are co-located with those wind farms to turn that power into global computing resources. So we are building data centers for hosting Bitcoin mining activities. We are building data centers now for AI and generative AI applications that can live close to renewable energy. So it turns out that I am taking a page out of Andy Grove's book here at Soluna and building and benefiting from another big convergence wave, essentially the convergence of energy, which is the biggest bottleneck to the growth and success, future success of AI right now, and combining it with the characteristics of that computing to create something new we call renewable computing. So energy needs a user for its wasted energy, and AI, in order to reach its goal, needs more sustainable energy. Well, guess what? There's a novel way to get it, to go to all the places where energy is just being wasted. That's what Soluna does. We're really excited about this. This is probably one of the most exciting companies I've run because it creates an opportunity to build a legendary company, creating something from nothing, solving a big problem, not just for the renewable energy industry, for the climate, for the next big, computing transformation that we're about to see. It's a very exciting time for us right now.
And before we pushed record here, we were just catching up for a moment, and you mentioned there's a couple big announcements and things that have happened in recent times with relationship to Soluna. What can you tell us about that news?
So we launched a new business unit we call Soluna Cloud. Soluna Cloud is focused on delivering sustainable, scalable AI solutions for enterprises. So big companies that are looking to dip their toes into the AI revolution can feel comfortable that they can do so in a secure way. So their data will be safe because they'll have a private reserved computing facility for that computing. So they can feel comfortable moving their proprietary data in there. They can feel good that they're not going to break their ESG goals by investing in this technology. There have been a number of announcements by Microsoft, Google, Meta, I believe, around the effects of their investment in AI really setting them back on their ESG goals. Enterprises can't afford that. And so in the boardroom, what you want to be able to say is, let's invest in AI and let's do it in a sustainable way. Soluna is the answer to that. And so Soluna Cloud is launched. We have launched our first through a important partnership with a big OEM partner. We have now access to some of the latest and greatest NVIDIA GPUs, H100 GPUs. We launched the first cluster of that, the first wave of that, 512 of them that are available now. So they're immediately available for enterprises to use them to download your favorite model, tune it using your own data, and start doing inferencing to see if it can have benefits for the growth and acceleration of your business. We're inviting folks to go to solunacloud.com to reserve GPUs for that purpose. So it's very exciting. It's powered by a tier 3 hydro-powered facility. And then as customers want more GPUs and as they grow, as they find these first tests with the sort of, it's like, think about it as like a startup cluster you can use, do some testing. Hey, this is going to work for us. I want to scale this up. Then you can come to us and get thousands more. We'll build entire facilities to support that at these renewable energy plants and grow from there. Our team is changing. Our focus as a business is changing. It's a very exciting time for us.
I'll put some links in the show notes for anybody that wants to dig a little deeper and click through some of that. And John, I should say, as you know, a lot of my listeners are enthusiastic about cryptocurrency and blockchain. And there's a big blockchain in the crypto industry called Solana. We're not talking about Solana. We're talking about Soluna. There's a little bit of a differential there that we should double click on there. But I do want to ask you, what is someone like yourself who is a lifelong technologist, worked on a lot of interesting technology over your career? I mean, how do you make sense of the emergence of blockchain and crypto? Is it something that baffles you, or is this sort of a natural extension of Web 2, if you will, and the evolution of tech?
That's a great question. I am no longer surprised by technology development anymore. And I think the reason is because let's assume there's like a big wave every 5 to 10 years, right? So like there was a point where you had like multiple waves happening at the same time, right? You had like mobile, Web 2.0, you had like social media, all this kind of stuff, right? The exciting thing about it is every time you get these big waves and then they mature, the next wave is actually built on top of that level of technology, right? And so the waves accelerate as you go along. 2008 was the timing of the white paper. It was right after the financial crisis, and people were trying to figure out like, how do we build a better, more resilient financial system, right? That doesn't rely on, the frailties of humanity. And what they did is they picked up old technologies like cyber cash and things like that and revisited them. Well, it turns out that some of the challenging things about those ideas was that we hadn't built the infrastructure and technology to support it yet, right? We didn't really have the internet in a broad, ubiquitous way like we had by 2008. We didn't have this concept of social graphs where people can, be connected, and this concept of like, hey, you can actually crowdsource things and things can be solved without a central body. Those frameworks allowed you to sort of think laterally. So Satoshi, or, the group of people who represent Satoshi, clearly benefited from the advancements of technology to go back and solve some of the hard problems you would need to solve to build, essentially digital money, right? And everything else was being digitized. Why not money? Right? So I think that digital currencies was inevitable. I think they will mature to become important parts of the global financial fabric. They already are starting to be integrated into our traditional finance platforms, right? With these ETFs, people are starting to understand the value of digital gold. It's a maturing process that's happening. And all of the things that you've seen, everything from the collapses and fraud and all that kind of stuff in the industry is natural as people sort of try to figure out how to leverage this technology. But once it matures, it will have, important ramifications for us going forward. and it will be part of the newest platform of which we can build the next innovation. So I am always fascinated, but not surprised.
You were talking about these cycles and how they typically occur, and correct me if I'm wrong, with these convergences. And I'm curious then if your brain says, well, the convergence here might be AI and blockchain. AI's been around for a long time. As you said, we're going back to '08 with the Bitcoin white paper and things like that. But there's a lot of interest in AI right now. There's a lot of interest in blockchain and crypto. Is there a convergence there that maybe people aren't recognizing?
Maybe some of the ideas for how AI can be used is this concept of AI agents. So you can set off these, robots to go do stuff for you, book your travel and all that kind of stuff, and do it in a safe way. It may make sense to leverage the digital infrastructure rails that have been built around cryptocurrencies to do that, right? You might go out and send your robot to do these transactions and use those rails because you trust them. They're safer. They're hard to crack versus the old credit card and financial rails for doing that. That might be an example of how those two worlds come together. Many times we've tried to create, these sort of personal financial assistants, with some of these big next generation financial platforms. They have not worked so well because mostly they're not really all that automated. And so maybe there's a way to use this new platform to build out true sort of financial management systems that are powered by AI and can really look at all sorts of, these huge hedge funds. They use AI and machine learning to look at all sorts of things that are happening in the market, the news, et cetera, and then make investment decisions. Well, why can't an individual do that? If you can set off an agent to ingest lots of interesting developments in the market and then sort of create insights around how you can invest. And then you can use AI to do that. And of course, different forms of financial investment resources to do that. You can start to create a whole new financial system and experience and services and so forth. There are a couple of things that people maybe aren't realizing about this whole AI movement. There's a lot of talk about it. And I think what you're going to see is sort of, people get tired of it, and then there'll be sort of like a cycle there, and then suddenly it will resurge and become one of the biggest waves we've ever seen. The internet did that. The web did that, right? The web grew and grew and grew, and then exploded like an atomic bomb. A lot of people lost a lot of money, and then now it has integrated in our lives so deeply that we actually don't even think about it anymore. We don't talk about the internet, but it is part of everything now, right? We're always connected. In fact, when we're not connected, we're very sad. AI has the same kind of potential. OpenAI has ingested just about every piece of data that it can get its hands on. And I've heard mentioned, that some of the other big AI labs they're running out of data. In fact, they're using the AI to generate data to train the AI. Like they're so in need of continuously making these models more complex. But there's a tremendous amount of data that they haven't even seen that lives inside of from the smallest to the largest companies in the world, right? Think about biotech companies and about the information they have about molecules and drug discovery and so forth. Imagine that was pushed into their own AI systems. The rate with which we can discover solutions to some of our biggest challenges as a species around ailments and so forth, we could significantly advance that drug discovery process by using that technology. Imagine the travel industry and how it can leverage sort of travel patterns and what's happening with the weather to improve the experience of travel. I hope to God that they do that, and I hope they don't charge us like extra money for that. There's lots of ways that we can use AI that we haven't even thought of yet. That's what makes it exciting, because its potential is really limitless. And so everyone is going to need access to computing. Everyone is going to use it to enhance what it is they're doing. Maybe Steve Jobs taking up one of his quotes, the computing is the bicycle for the mind, and I think AI is like a rocket ship for the mind. It's the next industrial revolution.
When we talk about computing and energy needed to do that, whether it's AI, whether it's blockchain or any other sort of novel or innovative tech, people generally just don't appreciate or understand how much energy that takes. In other words, John, because of the things you and the team are working on, you guys understand that energy and ensuring that computing has the energy to do what it needs to do is a huge friction point for growth and adoption worldwide.
Yes, it is. Yeah. I mean, to give you a sense, I've heard tell that ChatGPT took 1 GWh, just 1,000 megawatts. So think of like a New York City size sort of power plant. They trained it over several months. GPT-4, I think I've been using GPT-4 recently. It took 10 to 20 gigawatts hours. And so 10 times the size every time they do, one step change. And if you go into a typical data center and you look at the racks that these machines are sitting in, the power being provided to the rack is 10 times what it used to be before. And so you're basically running out of space to put this much computing in sort of these concentrated locations. And they're connecting these data centers directly to the grid, and they have to be on 24/7 in their view. And that is driving basically massive increases of power usage and keeping legacy power plants on more often. So we don't want that. We want to not go backwards as we progress from a technological standpoint. We don't want to go backwards from a climate perspective as we progress. We want to use this advancement to also accelerate our progress in climate. And so I think that's why it's important to think laterally about where we source this energy, go to places where it creates additionality. By putting data centers with renewables, we will bring more economics and catalyze more renewable development, which is ultimately what we want on the planet. If we went and took this computing and we built the pipes and we landed this on the continent of Africa, there is so much resources to develop power there. It would do two things at the same time. It would accelerate the sustainability of this technology, and it would equally lift the economic position of so many countries there that have no other way to grow their economy. Computing is a distributed, liquid, ubiquitous thing that we can do anywhere on the planet. And we finally reached a point where, we're building, the computer on the enterprise, right? That basically can help us to think about and solve challenging problems at an accelerated rate. We don't need to destroy the planet in the process to do that. We can actually make the planet greener in the process by using it to drive convergence. That's our view on it.
So, John, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask someone like you some questions about entrepreneurship and startups. And I should mention that you're the founder and managing editor of the CEO Playbook. And I'll put links in the show notes for people that want to kind of learn more about what that is and the work there. But let's assume that we've got listeners to this episode who want to be an entrepreneur. They want to create a startup, or they already have an idea and they're just a little trepidatious about getting started. But you've got a wealth of experience here. You're working on something exciting now. What are the one or two insights about startups specifically that you would be willing to share that you've learned over the years?
Having done several startups, it is not for the faint of heart. You really got to be out of your mind to go on these, startup ventures and stuff like that. But most entrepreneurs are a little bit out of their mind. They're the crazy ones, right? They're the folks who are trying to change the world. What I can tell you is that it's the greatest journey you'll ever go on if you're an entrepreneur. Whether it's short-lived, long-lived, it will change your life in the following ways. Number one, what I find is that, running a startup exposes you to a constant barrage of challenges that you have to solve, not just problems, but real sort of existential challenges. And you really got to have a drive to survive. And that teaches you a lot about yourself. So you're going to learn a lot about yourself forming a startup. I like to say that, startups are like, slowly climbing a really big mountain, and you're constantly pushing and pushing up the mountain, and it's getting harder and harder, and the pain is building. But you got to get to the top. And when you reach the top, you realize that the mountain, there was no mountain. The mountain was you. You are the mountain. The whole time it was about conquering your own abilities and figuring out what your true potential could be. And so I really encourage people to explore entrepreneurship, but just know that it's not going to be easy, and that's okay. The failure each of those failures that you experience will be information that you can use to drive success. You will now know what does not work. Now go do what might work, And so it's a fascinating experience. You made mention of CEO Playbook. What I've tried to do is to write down all of the insights and learnings that I've had over the years. I'm actually a little bit behind. There's so many things that I just haven't had time to write down, but I will get back to it. And these are insights that come from the perspective of the CEO seat. It turns out that being an entrepreneur and founder, people think that is the role that you're going to have the entire time the company grows up from a little baby until a full grown adult. And it turns out that as the company grows, you're going to learn a couple of things. Number one, it doesn't go up and to the right. There isn't like this line that just goes up and to the right. It actually goes up, then it goes down and spirals around. You have to figure out if you want to hang on to the plane, you're like falling out of the plane, and then you got to turn it up and fly it back up and then start pushing it back up again. Then it goes back down. And each time that happens, that's a sign that the company is actually changing. It's going through a phase change. And in those phase changes, you as a individual have to change. So when the company goes from, that initial idea, you've got your co-founders together, you're all in a room, and a WeWork somewhere. Well, no, WeWork's going bankrupt, but whatever. WeWork like place, and you're just sort of figuring it out. And then you bring in that first slug of capital. Well, your roles have to change now. Somebody has to be CEO because there's a fiduciary responsibility managing other people's money and investing in your company to return it. Someone has to take that role and become the true leader. The person who goes through that shift, that's a hard shift to go from a founder to a CEO. A CEO has a very specific role in the company, right? They have to manage the acquisition and deployment of capital. They have to find the best talent to support the growth of the company at these different stages. They have to exemplify leadership and be a leader. And by the way, just being CEO doesn't make you a leader. It's like, when you walk down the hallway, there better be people following you. Otherwise, you're not a leader. You have to create culture and really think about it and do it on purpose, not happenstance way. And then you have to set direction. People need to know where you're going, and they need to believe in the future of the business. I tell our company every day, repetition is important, that we are creating a new relationship between renewables and computing. We are setting the stage for renewables to become the future of the planet, and changing the relationship with computing. Computing will become the primary catalyst for that. That's what we're trying to create. So everything we do has to be about serving that mission, and that's our vision. We're going to build a $1 billion company doing that. I just went through a whole bunch of stuff that most people, they're like, yes, I'm a founder, and I'm doing entrepreneurship now. This is great, and they just don't know that as you progress through those stages, as I talked about up that chain, your role as a leader, how you approach leadership, what the people around you have to do, what their growth has to look like over time changes. And you have to recognize when the company is going through those changes to make that shift. So that's the kind of stuff that I write about. I write about the sort of, lonely role of the CEO and how hard it is to deal with some of that loneliness and the imposter syndrome that might come with, you raise like $1 billion suddenly and you think you're smart. Yeah, I see founders like, we just did this big round, we're successful, Actually, no, you just raised a bunch of money. Now you need to make that money sing, right? And that takes a lot of work. There's so much to talk about entrepreneurship. It's a fantastic experience, and I wish anyone the best that does it, and I encourage them to go for it.
Well, John, I only have one more question for you before I ask you the GRTiQ 10. And these are 10 fun questions I ask each guest of the podcast every week. And that last question is then about fear. So my thesis is most entrepreneurs or people who want to be an entrepreneur either fail or never get started because of fear. They're afraid of failure. They're afraid of rejection, afraid of a host of other things. And so my question to someone like yourself is, what's your relationship with fear? Are you not afraid to fail?
No, I am no longer afraid to fail. I was in the past until I finally realized the role of fear. It actually is a gift. So if you feel scared as an entrepreneur, that's a good thing. If you don't feel scared, you should be worried about yourself. Something's wrong with you. I've known fear. In fact, there's a great article on the blog that I think it's Fear is a Gift or something like that. And it talks about this experience I had many years ago. I was coming from my job. Like I had a job in high school. I did like data entry at this company. And on the way back, my brother had asked me to pick up like a snack for him or something like that. So I get off the bus and I go into this convenience store on the corner of, not too far from our house. And, I walk into the store and I feel like suddenly I've taken flight, and I'm like flying through the air and I crash into like the delectables, the Twinkie stand, the display. And I'm like, how did that happen? And I turn around and there's a guy there holding a really large gun, facing, my chest. And he says, get your ass over there. And I'm like, holy smokes, And he turns to the guy at the register and he's like, hurry the F up. I ain't got all day. Put the money in the bag faster. He's commanding everybody. And then at some point, he turns it back and I'm like frozen, and, my heart's like beating. I think it was probably beating to like Michael Jackson's like Beat It song or something. Anyway, I look around and I see at some point the guy becomes impatient and he says, get out of the way. He starts like loading the money in himself. And, it's kind of like one of those movies, A few minutes later, I noticed this old woman who's about to walk into the store. I'm like, oh my God, she should not come in here. And suddenly like my vision, like everything that's like, it's almost like the world slows down, becomes super clear. I look at the woman straight in the eyes and I'm like, don't come here, like, don't come in. And suddenly she looks at me, looks kind of around, and then she like scurries off. And then the guy's done. He lines everybody up. So me and the rest of the gang were like, oh, holy smoke, this is it. And I like basically like close my eyes and I hear bang. It's the firing of the gun. The guy like laughs and he like runs out the door. By the time we open our eyes, we see the guy's gone. And like, we come off of this like adrenaline experience and everything. And what I realized is that was fear. That is fear. Everything else that you're thinking about when you're concerned about losing a deal or not getting the latest financing or something like that, the reality of it is it's a manifestation of fear that we sort of experience as humanity in the savannah. That fear is more anxiety. It's the feeling of what happens when you think about something that might happen in the future and you sort of attach, your feeling to it. And it basically sort of creates a signal for you. Hey, you're worried about something in the future and you need to do something right now to change that future because the future isn't set, you see? And so what an entrepreneur needs to do is to begin to become super connected with themselves and notice when they're anxious, but it's presenting as fear, and realize that the thing you need to do is focus right now. Like get out of your head, come back to the present and write down what are the 2 to 3 things that I need to do right now such that thing that I'm worrying about in the future does not happen. And it turns out that, right at that moment, you're going to write down a few ideas. In fact, at Soluna here, we have an exercise called the 10 ideas exercise. It's a fantastic way to build that muscle of ideas when crises happen. So we're constantly using it for solving problems. We try to come up with 10 ideas that can address the issue. If we can't come up with 10, we come up with 20. If we can't do 20, we do 30. We just try to come up with as many dumb ideas as possible. And guess what? There's always going to be one that's just like, wow, why didn't I think of that? Well, you just did think about it, but and you get everybody involved, and suddenly you are solving the very problems that you were worried about. So I've become very comfortable with fear. In fact, when I start feeling fearful, I'm like, this is great. I'm going to come up with the solution now, because now I know that there's something that I need to do right now to set the company on the direction, the future, that we need to go on. And so what I would say for entrepreneurs that are listening, don't run away from fear. Actually embrace it. Embrace fear. It's a fantastic tool, as I said, for giving you clarity of focus and insight. And in that article that I mentioned, there's a little framework at the bottom actually that helps you understand where you are in time. Are you focused on the past? In my last company, I went through this and everything was really bad, Well, just because, the last company was bad doesn't mean it's going to be bad here. So let go of that experience. Oh man, I think that we're definitely going to lose this deal, or this product's not going to work very well. And, so now you're sort of moving into the future. And when you can determine where you are, then it gives you a great framework for determining what to do at that particular moment. And what is it you actually need to kind of recenter yourself. That's proven really helpful for me. And it really does help drive a lot of my success and the team's success. I have this mantra, keep pushing. You have to keep going. You can't just become frozen with fear like a deer in the headlights. You actually have to keep pushing. And to do that, you have to know what to do. Once you know where you are, then you know what to do. That's my relationship with fear. I see it as a gift and a tool for focusing my execution.
John, thank you for the insights there, and thank you for sharing that story. It certainly sets a lot of context for how someone like yourself might think through that. And I'll put a link to that blog post in the show notes. So for any listener that wants to learn more about how fear can be a gift. And as I said, John, now I want to ask you the GRTiQ 10. These are kind of a lightning round, 10 questions I ask each guest of the podcast every week. Part of it, of course, is to get to know you a little bit better, some of your personal interests and things that you've learned. But I always hope that listeners will learn something new, try something different, or achieve more in their own life. And so, John, are you ready for the GRTiQ 10?
I hope so. Hit me.
The GRTiQ 10. This is the way.
10 questions for astronauts floating in space.
What book or article has had the most impact on your life?
Oh, I read a lot, so that's a hard one. I'll give you a few must reads. Actually, I'll give you one primary one. It's Influence by Robert Cialdini. If folks haven't read it, it's an older book. Professor Cialdini has written about the concept of how do you influence. As an innovator, 99% of what you're doing is trying to convince people to do things differently. There are a set of systems that are very effective to convincing people to do things. And Cialdini has written about them in this book called Influence. So that's one of my favorites. I just happened to be talking about that with a friend the other day. Made to Stick by Dan and Chip Heath is another one that tells you how to create a story or a pitch that's sticky. Matter of fact, I think I'm going to read it again. I'm going to reread it because there's so many great insights there, and there's a whole sort of framework there as well. I'm a big believer in finding frameworks that can be helpful for you and reading them. Another one is Super Thinking. I can't remember the name of the author now, but you'll know the book. There's like a superhero in the front, and it's like 1,000 different mental models that you can learn and apply to problem solving. I've read a lot of books about sort of biographies about companies and founders of those companies. The Steve Jobs one was a fascinating one. Like I cried reading that book. It's just so insightful and deep in terms of like the entrepreneurial experience. I've talked about Andy Grove's book, Swimming Across. So Swimming Across is a great sort of mini biography about his life and challenges and tribulations that have ultimately drove him to his success. Only the Paranoid Survive, also by Andy, is another one. So many books. I have book lists on the website too. You should definitely check them out. Oh, there's one article which is about a first-time CEO. So you sit in the seat for the first time. Like, what are the 5 to 10 things that you need to think about? And in each one of those things, I give a list of books that can be helpful to do that. So that would be the answer to the question. There's no one book. It's kind of like asking me my favorite movie. If you're going to do that, that's going to be hard too.
Well, what a great segue. Is there a movie or a TV show that you would recommend everybody should watch?
Oh, okay. Look, I love the Godfather movies. I watch them every chance that I get. And TV show, one of my favorite TV shows is the Game of Thrones series. I really love that. I started rewatching The Sopranos recently, but you know what show is like a documentary of startup life? It's Silicon Valley. I wasn't watching it. And then toward like the tail end of my last company, I heard my team talking about it. I'm like, all right, I'll just watch it for, a couple of, sessions. And I was like, this isn't a sitcom. This is a this is exactly what happens. and it is hilarious. A friend of mine was visiting from, he's a lawyer from Indianapolis. He came to visit with us and he's like, I've been watching this show, but have you watched it? And I says, well, no, I never watched it. And so we sat and started watching it together. So it was good to have a pal. I was like laughing and he's like, I was laughing about this too, but I don't know why. and I explained to him like, here's what's going on. And he's like, oh, so I would definitely watch that one because they do a great job of showing all the stuff that happens when you're trying to build a company. Again, it's not up and to the right. You don't just get the money and then everything goes easy after that. It gets harder and harder. And so that's a great one that I would recommend watching just to, if not for humor and, some kind of like get your mind off the business, it'll give you insights too.
And how about this one? If you could choose only one music album to listen to for the rest of your life, which one would you choose?
Wow. That's interesting. The one that comes to mind is the Michael Jackson's Thriller album. Every time I hear that, it's just like fantastic. Prince also, his Purple Rain album. I'm still connected to like the classic artists. I listen to a lot of like techno dance music now. It seems to put my brain in like this right frequency for like deep work. My old co-founder actually is now a DJ Hools, and he put some good stuff out there. So I'm gonna give him some props here on the show. So I probably would listen to his stuff, if I was decamped in some like bunker somewhere. I think that's it. I'm not going to say, all the stuff that my kids make me listen to right now. I think I would kill myself, if I that's it.
Well, how about this one then, John? What's the best advice someone's ever given to you?
Laser focus. So when I first started my first company, I did something unusual. I didn't know anything about starting a company. So I said, like, there's got to be people around here. It was in Boston. Like I said, I went to, sleep on my friend's floor. And we're in the office and there's a whole bunch of questions like, how do you raise money? How do you evaluate a term sheet? All this kind of stuff. So this was before, the internet was really, something. I grabbed the Cornell alumni directory and I looked up all the professionals that were in Boston. And I looked up like the CEO titles and I just started cold calling them. Hey, my name is John. I'm a Cornell alumni. I really need your help. I have all these questions about entrepreneurship and so forth. And then there was this one guy who was, who took my meeting, and so I went to visit him in his office and I was like, wow, look at this. How did he do this? It was like a beautiful office and people are humming away. And he built like this financial information platform. In fact, it still exists today. It's like a sort of investor relations kind of platform companies use. And it was like his third company or something like that. And he sat me down and he says, well, what questions do you have? And I just started peppering him with questions and he would answer them beautifully, so succinctly, like, think about this, think about that. This is what you got to do. Here's what it says. And he says, I'm so happy you came. This is great for me to be able to help a young entrepreneur. But listen, if you remember nothing that I said, remember this. For you to be successful as an entrepreneur, you have to be laser focused. Once you set your target, don't veer off. Entrepreneurs, founders have this disease that they encounter called the shiny object syndrome. Everything's going well. They're pursuing this thing. And then there's this other thing. And they're like, hey, maybe we should do that too. And it throws the company off. They start to thrash and ultimately fail. Be careful of those shiny objects. One of the things that I've become really good at as CEO is just saying, no, we're not going to do that. That's not our focus. That's not our plan of record, is like what I'd say to the team. We have a plan. We're sticking to the plan. I'm okay, changing the plan, but we have to sit down and really understand if that's what we really want to do. Most of the time, the stuff that we're looking at is a distraction. and it takes us away from executing on what our primary focus should be. So be laser focused as an entrepreneur. It is by far, one of the best pieces of advice I've ever had.
And then question 5 of the GRTiQ 10 is, what's one thing you've learned in your life, John, that you don't think most other people have learned or know yet?
So I have this list actually of life insights that I write down. I would say that most people haven't connected with this concept. And that is that when you're thinking, like when your brain is actually working and thinking, it should be intentional. Most of the time, we're not actually experiencing the world the way it's really happening. We're filtering it through the noisy chatter that's happening in our minds that actually affects our mood, how happy we are. It has actually nothing to do with the experience that's happening around us, but what we're actually thinking at that particular moment. And so one insight that I think most people don't know, and I think is really helpful to anyone, and not just anyone, but entrepreneurs, is when you find yourself thinking, is that on purpose? The stuff that you're thinking? Like, did you actually tell yourself, let me think about this? Or did your brain just kind of run off and start doing its own thing? If you stop and ask yourself that question often, you'll find that it'll quiet your mind down a lot, and you can think on things a little bit more intentionally, and that will have a material change on your mood, your insights about the world, problem solving, relationships, your connection to life itself. So thinking should be intentional. That's the insight I think most people don't realize.
And how about this one, John? What's the best life hack you've discovered for yourself?
Life hack, just read a lot and keep learning. If I had to talk to my younger self, I would tell my younger self, please read more. And the reason I didn't actually, I realized it was because I was a slow reader. I would sort of mouth the words in my mind, and I would just get tired, because the brain can only do that so much. During one of my breaks, I started reading more, and I realized that you can buy books on Amazon and then buy the audio that comes with the book. And what that allowed me to do was to not have to mouth the words, because I can hear them, and I'm reading the words as the words are being read to me. So I found that it accelerated the rate of my reading. And then I sped up the audio and tested my comprehension, and I realized, oh wow, that works even faster. It actually increased my reading rate. And so now I can get through books much faster. It's become actually my system now. So I do audiobooks and written digital books at the same time in an integrated fashion at a high speed rate. And so now my reading rate when I'm not audio, because my inner voice is actually going at the audio speed. You can train yourself to pretty much do anything, And so now I'm an incredibly fast reader. So I'm able to get through a lot more books, and that has changed my life like big time. Like I can pick up, I'm constantly learning. So I'm teaching myself a lot about AI right now. I'll have like 3 or 4 books I'm going through at the same time. And then I highlight them, and then I use that Readwise app. I don't know if folks know about that, but it basically takes your highlights and creates a whole stream of it for you, and then it can play it back to you. So I have a Readwise stream that gets played to me every morning, and I read it. And so it refreshes my insights from the books that I've read. So it continues to consolidate that learning. And then sometimes those refreshes are timely. It's like, oh yeah, that's right. And then it hits me that this could apply to a problem that I'm dealing with right now, and I solve that. Or it's an insight that sort of triggers a fundamental consolidation of like learning, and then it causes me to write something. And I have like hundreds of these insights that I've written over time. And in fact, I wrote a book last summer called Keep Pushing, and there's a lot of those insights in there, and a lot of the quotes are actually playbacks from my highlights of the books, because they reminded me of these things. So that's my life hack. It's like, read more, read a lot, just keep reading, never stop. Even like you look at Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger, they're always saying like, set aside time for reading, And so I do that every 30 minutes before I go to bed. I try to do some reading. That's part of my, wind down. So that's my life hack.
And then number 7, based on your own life experiences and observations, what's the one habit or characteristic that you think best explains how people find success in life?
It's persistence. It is fundamentally persistence. We have this keep pushing mantra in the book is basically do not stop. Never, ever stop. No matter how hard things get for you in life and in business, you really have to keep pushing through them, because that's where all of the learning happens. I like to say that pain is where the learning happens. So you really need that pain to, think about when you work out, that growth in your muscle, that pain that you feel, that's why they say pain, no gain. It's because that's where the muscle learns that it needs to be ready to lift, this big weight the next time. That's where the brain learns that it needs to, it's seen this problem before and it needs to kind of push through it. I have also found that most of the companies that are successful out there and most people that are successful have been becoming ready to be successful, right? The persistence in doing the things that they do, the boring things that they do consistently and persistently for a long time, ultimately prepare them to benefit from a big technology wave or some event that, is perfect for them. And when you take advantage of that event, people think like, wow, that person is just like so smart, so amazing. They've been able to, solve for that. And in reality, it was just patience the whole time. It was just persistently doing what you do and keep doing it over time that makes you look brilliant. At the end of the day, Soluna, we've been running this business for 6 straight years, persistently learning about energy, solving really challenging problems, and putting these data centers behind the meter and everything. And we've been saying that energy is going to be a big thing that affects the future of computing. We've been saying that for a long time. Now, every single article, we look so smart, but we just kept saying it. We just kept doing it, And so persistence is a key to getting ready to get lucky.
And then, John, the final 3 questions of the GRTiQ 10 are complete the sentence type questions. So the first one is, the thing that most excites me about AI is? Its
future potential to accelerate the success of most enterprises.
And how about this one? If you're on X, I still call it Twitter, you should be following?
Me? I like this guy. He does a lot of summaries about books. Reads with Ravi.
And then the final question, John, is this. Complete this sentence. I'm happiest when?
I'm happiest when I'm with my family, enjoying each other. And I'm happiest when I'm just sitting outside, ideally on the sand, on a beach, reading a really good book.
The GRTiQ 10.
And I show you how deep.
John, thank you so much for taking the time to join the GRTiQ podcast. It's been a lot of fun to learn about you and some of the experiences and perspectives that you shared here today, as well as Soluna and the things you're working on there. If individuals who listen today want to follow you, stay in touch with the things you're working on, what's the best way for them to stay in touch?
You can find me on Twitter. I'm John Belizaire. I'm at JBelizaire CEO. Soluna, you can find us also on Twitter or X. We're at Soluna Holdings. You can visit our website. We're solunacomputing.com. Our new cloud business is solunacloud.com. You can find us on LinkedIn. Just search for the Soluna Holdings company page on LinkedIn and follow us there. We also have a podcast of our own. It's called Clean Integration. And we talk about all things energy and computing. And sometimes we do special segments. We're starting a new one on AI here in our latest season. You also can get insights about more than just John. You can meet some of our members of management. We talk about our big initiatives and what's happening in the company. So it's a fun listen. Encourage you to do that as well.
production of the GRTiQ podcast. For more information, including detailed show notes, visit grtiq.com/podcast. That's grtiq.com/podcast.
Please consider contributing to this project and helping build the community by subscribing and leaving a review.
GRTiQ
Podcast.